While I was serving overseas, my wife told me our newborn daughter had died during childbirth. I spent 12 years grieving a child I never got to meet. Then a stranger sent me a message with one sentence that destroyed everything I thought I knew. Your daughter is alive. If someone had told me that the worst day of my life wasn't the day I buried my daughter, but the day I discovered she had never died at all, I would have called them insane. For 12 years I lived with a grief that never belonged to me. I cried for a child I believed I'd lost. I blamed myself for not being there. I visited an empty grave. I apologized to a daughter who was still alive. And the person responsible was the one I trusted most, my wife. My name is Daniel. I'm 39 years old now, and for most of my adult life I worked as a military engineer. I wasn't a soldier carrying a rifle into combat. My job was to build bridges, repair military bases, and keep equipment running in places where everything seemed determined to fall apart. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. The work gave me purpose. The paycheck gave me stability, and every time I came home, there was one person waiting for me, Rachel. I met Rachel at a charity fundraiser in Chicago. She was funny, smart, beautiful in a way that didn't need expensive clothes or makeup. She laughed with her whole heart, the kind of laugh that made everyone else smile without realizing it. By the end of the night, we talked for 4 hours. 3 years later, she became my wife. Looking back now, I still wonder if the woman I married ever really existed, or if I only fell in love with the version she wanted me to see. Our marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is. Military life meant I was away for months at a time. Birthdays were missed. Anniversaries were celebrated over video calls. Sometimes I'd wake up in another country just to watch Rachel eat dinner through a phone screen. It wasn't easy, but we always promised each other one thing. No matter how hard life gets, we'll never stop choosing each other. I believed that promise, every single word. 2 years after our wedding, Rachel told me she was pregnant. I still remember exactly where we were. Saturday morning, our tiny kitchen. She handed me a coffee mug. On the bottom, there was a tiny pair of baby socks. At first, I didn't understand. Then she smiled. We're going to be parents. I actually cried, not the quiet kind of tears, the ugly crying that makes you laugh at yourself afterward. I picked her up and spun her around the kitchen while she screamed, Daniel, put me down before you drop your pregnant wife. It was the happiest day of my life, or so I thought. The pregnancy was smooth. Every doctor's appointment brought another photo, another heartbeat, another reason to believe life couldn't get any better. At 20 weeks, we found out we were having a girl. Rachel wanted to name her Lily. I wanted Sophia. We argued for almost an hour before agreeing we'd decide after she was born. Neither of us knew I would never get that chance. About a month before Rachel's due date, everything changed. I was called into my commander's office. A major military base overseas had suffered structural damage after severe flooding. They needed experienced engineers immediately. The mission would last between 6 and 8 weeks. I stared at my commander. My wife gives birth in 4 weeks. I know. I can't go, he sighed. I've already tried finding someone else. There isn't anyone. Military life doesn't always give you choices. Sometimes, duty chooses for you. That night, Rachel sat beside me on the couch. I expected her to be angry. Instead, she held my hand. You have to go. I don't. Yes, you do. I promised I'd be there. She smiled softly. You'll make it back. And if you don't, she placed my hand on her stomach. You'll spend the rest of your life making it up to her. Our daughter kicked for the first time. I laughed. I think she's already judging me. Rachel laughed too. It was the last genuine laugh I would ever hear from her before leaving. I kissed Rachel goodbye at the airport. She whispered, come home to us. I will. Those were the last words we spoke in person as husband and wife. The deployment was harder than expected. Communication was unreliable. Sometimes days passed without internet access. Whenever I managed to call, Rachel sounded tired, but happy. Everything seemed normal until 3 days before her due date. My satellite phone rang just after midnight. Rachel. I answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart. Silence, then, sobbing, my heart stopped. Rachel, she couldn't speak. Finally, between broken breaths, she whispered, Daniel, our baby. My entire body went numb. What happened? More crying, then the words that shattered my world. She didn't make it. Everything after that became a blur. The doctors, complications, emergency surgery. They had done everything they could, at least. That's what Rachel told me. I remember dropping the phone. I remember someone shouting my name. I remember waking up in the military medical tent after collapsing. The chaplain sat beside my bed. I don't remember anything he said, because all I could hear was one sentence. Your daughter didn't make it. I begged my commander to send me home, but military flights were delayed because of the flooding. It took almost 6 weeks before I returned. The longest 6 weeks of my life, every night. I imagined the daughter I'd never get to hold. I imagined her tiny fingers, her first smile, the first time she'd call me Dad, then I'd remember. None of it would ever happen. Rachel picked me up from the airport. She looked different, not just sad, empty. She hugged me for only a second. Neither of us spoke during the drive home. When we finally reached the house, I noticed something strange. The nursery was gone. Every toy, every blanket, every baby item, gone. It looked like no child had ever been expected. I asked quietly, Where's Lily's room? Rachel turned away. I donated everything. So quickly? I couldn't look at it anymore. I nodded. Grief affects everyone differently, at least. That's what I kept telling myself. A few days later, I asked about the funeral. Rachel's face tightened. I handled it. Without me, I didn't think you'd make it home in time. I wanted to say goodbye. You weren't here. Her words hit harder than she probably intended. I never asked again. Months passed. Rachel became colder. She stopped talking about the baby altogether. If I mentioned our daughter, she'd leave the room. If I suggested therapy, she refused. Eventually, we stopped sleeping in the same bedroom. The silence between us grew louder than any argument. 3 years later, we signed divorce papers. No screaming, no fighting. Just two strangers ending a marriage that had died long before the paperwork. The judge asked if we wanted to say anything. Rachel simply shook her head. I whispered, "I hope you find peace." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't understand. It almost looked like guilt. Life moved on, at least. It pretended to. I accepted promotions, bought a small house, started volunteering with veterans. People told me I was healing. They were wrong. You don't heal from losing a child. You simply learn how to carry the weight without collapsing. Every year, on what should have been my daughter's birthday, I'd buy a small teddy bear, then donate it to the children's hospital. It was my way of remembering someone I never met. 12 years passed. Then one ordinary Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was sitting alone on my porch when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored those. Something told me not to. The message contained only one sentence. Your daughter is alive, and I can prove it. My hands started shaking. I read it again, and again. Then I noticed there was a photo attached, a teenage girl around 12 years old, standing beside a birthday cake. She had my eyes, my smile, and the exact same tiny birthmark that every man in my family had carried for generations. I couldn't breathe. For 12 years, I had mourned a daughter who had never died. I must have read that message 50 times. Your daughter is alive, and I can prove it. Every part of me wanted to believe it. Every logical part of my brain told me it had to be a cruel prank. My daughter had died. I'd spent 12 years grieving her. People don't just come back from the dead. Yet, I couldn't stop staring at the photo. The little girl had my eyes, not similar. Identical, the same dark brown eyes my father had, the same smile my mother always teased me about. Even the tiny birthmark near her left ear. Every firstborn in my family had it. It wasn't possible, but somehow, it was. I replied with shaking hands. Who are you? The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. My name is Melissa. We shouldn't talk over text. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m., Riverside Cafe. She attached the address, nothing else that night. I didn't sleep. I pulled out the small wooden box I'd kept hidden in my closet for years. Inside was the only thing I had left of my daughter, a pink knitted baby blanket Rachel had bought during her pregnancy. I held it against my chest. For 12 years, I'd cried into that blanket if someone had lied to me, if someone had stolen my child. I didn't know whether I'd scream or completely fall apart. The next afternoon, I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early. Every woman who walked through the door made my heart race. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman in her late 50s walked in carrying a brown folder. She looked nervous. She spotted me immediately. Daniel, I stood. Melissa, she nodded the moment she sat down. She pushed the folder toward me. Before I could even open it, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I frowned. Do I know you? No. I worked at Bright Horizons Adoption Agency. The words hit me like a freight train. Adoption. What does that have to do with my daughter? Melissa looked around to make sure no one was listening. Then she said the sentence that changed my life forever. Your daughter was never dead. I stopped breathing. She continued carefully. 12 years ago, your wife came to our agency with a newborn baby. I shook my head. No, she told us you had abandoned her during pregnancy. No, she claimed she didn't have the financial or emotional ability to raise the baby. I slammed my hand onto the table. You're lying. I wish I was. Melissa opened the folder. Inside were copies of adoption paperwork. I saw Rachel's signature. Then, my own. I stared at it. That wasn't my handwriting. That wasn't my signature. Someone had forged it. I whispered, I never signed this. Melissa nodded. I know. She explained everything. At the time, she had only been an administrative assistant. Rachel claimed I had already signed the consent forms before leaving the country. Everything appeared legitimate. No one questioned it. The adoption moved forward within weeks. A loving couple adopted the baby girl. They named her Grace. I felt physically sick. I wasn't mourning a dead daughter. I had been searching for a grave, while my child was learning to ride a bicycle, celebrating birthdays, starting school, growing up. Without ever knowing her father wanted her, I looked at Melissa. Why are you telling me this now? Her eyes filled with tears. Because I found something. She reached into the folder again, a faded envelope. Last month our agency was closing permanently. We were destroying old files. I found your case. Inside was a handwritten note, Rachel's handwriting. Melissa handed it to me. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped it. The note read, Daniel loves this baby more than he loves me. If he comes home, everything will be about her. I didn't marry a man who'd spend his life choosing someone else. She's better off with another family. I read it 3 times. Every word hurt more than the last. My wife hadn't lost our daughter. She had gotten rid of her because she was jealous of her own child. Tears blurred my vision. Melissa quietly reached across the table. I'm sorry. I should have questioned the paperwork. I should have noticed the signatures. I've regretted it every day. I looked up. This isn't your fault. It was hers. Melissa took a deep breath. There's more. She slid another envelope toward me. This contains the adoptive parents' information. I hesitated. Can I just show up? She shook her head. No, they're good people. They have no idea the adoption was fraudulent. They believed everything Rachel told them. I nodded slowly. They're victims, too. For the next week, I couldn't bring myself to visit. What if she hated me? What if seeing me destroyed the only family she'd ever known? Emma wasn't there to help this time. I was completely alone, every night. I drove past the address, every night. I kept driving. On the 8th day, I finally parked across the street. A modest 2-story house, white fence, blue shutters, children's bicycles in the driveway. It looked happy then. The front door opened. A teenage girl ran outside laughing. She was chasing a golden retriever around the yard. Her father chased after her with a garden hose. Her mother stood on the porch laughing so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. I couldn't move. Grace, my daughter, she looked so happy. I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt grateful. The people raising her clearly loved her. They had given her the childhood I thought she'd never have. I sat there for almost an hour, watching from a distance. Then I quietly drove away. She didn't know I existed, and I wasn't about to destroy her world overnight. 3 days later, everything changed again. I came home from work and found an official envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a court order. My heart pounded as I read the first page. Rachel had filed for a restraining order against me, according to her. I was stalking her, harassing her, and trying to kidnap our daughter. I stood frozen. She knew. She somehow knew. I had discovered the truth, and she wasn't about to let me get anywhere near the child she'd stolen. At the bottom of the paperwork, one sentence caught my eye. Temporary hearing scheduled in 7 days. I looked at Rachel's signature. Then at the forged signature she'd placed on my adoption papers 12 years earlier. She had lied once and destroyed my life. This time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I had spent 12 years believing my daughter was dead. Rachel had stolen birthdays, Christmas mornings, first words, first steps, every memory a father should have had. Now, she wanted the court to believe I was the dangerous one. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done being the victim. The next morning, I hired the best family law attorney I could find. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She had spent nearly 20 years handling adoption fraud and custody cases. After listening to my story, she leaned back in her chair. For almost a minute, she didn't say a word. Finally, she asked, "Do you still have the adoption papers?" I handed her Melissa's folder. She examined every page. Then she looked directly at me. "This isn't just fraud. It's criminal." Sarah immediately hired a forensic handwriting expert. 3 days later, the report arrived. There was no doubt the signature on the adoption papers was forged. Every single page, every signature, every initial. None of them belonged to me. Rachel hadn't just lied, she had committed multiple felonies. Then Sarah made another discovery, the hospital records. Rachel had requested that I not be contacted during the delivery. She had signed a document claiming, "The biological father is absent and does not wish to participate." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I had called Rachel every single day from overseas. She knew exactly where I was. She simply didn't want anyone telling me the truth. The restraining order hearing arrived. Rachel walked into the courtroom wearing a designer suit. She looked confident, almost relaxed. She smiled when she saw me. The same fake smile she'd worn the day she told me our daughter had died. Her attorney confidently addressed the judge. "My client has been harassed by her former husband after 12 years of no contact. He recently began stalking a minor child." I stayed silent. Sarah stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit new evidence." The courtroom became very quiet. One by one, Sarah displayed every document, the forged signatures, the expert report, hospital records, military deployment logs proving I couldn't have signed anything, phone records showing I had called Rachel repeatedly during the delivery. Then, Melissa testified. She admitted the agency had unknowingly processed a fraudulent adoption. Rachel's confidence slowly disappeared. For the first time, she looked scared. Then the judge asked Rachel a simple question. "Did you tell Mr. Carter that his child had died?" Rachel hesitated. The judge repeated himself. "Yes or no?" Rachel whispered. "Yes." The entire courtroom fell silent. Sarah wasn't finished. She requested DNA testing. Rachel's attorney objected. The judge approved it anyway. Within 2 weeks, the results returned. There was a 99.99% probability that Grace was my biological daughter. Rachel had no explanation. The judge immediately dismissed the restraining order. Then he referred the case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Rachel walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. For the first time in 12 years, she had nowhere left to hide. A week later, another surprise arrived. Rachel's current husband called me. His name was Victor, a successful real estate developer. We met at a quiet restaurant. He looked exhausted. "I owe you an apology," I frowned. "For what?" I believed Rachel. He slid divorce papers across the table. "I filed yesterday, apparently." Rachel had never told him she had another child, or that she'd been married before. She'd built their entire marriage on lies. Victor looked at me. If she'll do this to her own daughter, what else has she lied about? Over the next month, Rachel's perfect life collapsed. The newspapers covered the adoption fraud case. Friends stopped calling. Sponsors withdrew from the charity boards she served on. The country club revoked her membership. Her employer quietly terminated her contract. Everything she'd spent 12 years building disappeared, exactly the way she'd erased my life. Meanwhile, Sarah contacted Grace's adoptive parents. I expected anger. Instead, they asked to meet me. I drove to their house with my heart pounding. When the door opened, a man about my age extended his hand. "I'm Michael. This is my wife, Emily." Neither of them looked hostile. They looked heartbroken. Emily started crying before she even spoke. "We didn't know. We swear we didn't know. I believed them. You can't fake that kind of pain. They invited me inside. Family photos covered every wall. Grace as a toddler. Grace learning to ride a bike. Grace winning school awards, 12 years of memories. Every picture reminded me of everything I'd missed. Emily gently held my hand. We've loved her every single day. I know. And we're terrified she'll think we lied to her. I shook my head. You didn't. The only liar was Rachel, Michael sighed. Grace doesn't know any of this. We wanted to wait until the investigation finished. I nodded. I understand. He looked at me carefully. Would you like to meet her? Every part of me screamed yes, but another part, the father inside me, wanted to protect her. What if she hates me? Emily smiled through tears. I don't think that's possible. That Saturday afternoon. Grace came home from soccer practice. She walked through the front door carrying her backpack. She looked exactly like Rachel, until she smiled. That smile was mine. Michael called her into the living room. Grace, there's someone we'd like you to meet. She looked at me politely. Hi. I stood frozen, my daughter, only a few feet away, completely unaware that I'd spent 12 years mourning her. She extended her hand. I'm Grace. I couldn't stop staring at her. Finally, I managed to whisper, hi. I'm Daniel. She smiled kindly. It's nice to meet you. She had no idea. She had just introduced herself to her real father. People always imagine revenge as a dramatic moment. A courtroom victory, a prison sentence, a public apology. But after everything Rachel had done, none of those things mattered to me anymore. There was only one question left. Would my daughter ever accept me the day after we met? Michael called. Grace wants to see you again. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Really? She said you seem familiar. I laughed softly. I hope that's a good sign. It is. Over the next month, we met every Saturday. Sometimes we'd have lunch. Sometimes we'd walk through the park. Other times we'd just sit at a cafe talking. She asked me about my job. Military engineering, the countries I'd visited, the bridges I'd helped build. She loved hearing stories about places she'd never seen. One afternoon she smiled and said, You explain things like my dad. I looked at Michael. He smiled back. I'll take that as a compliment. Michael and Emily never tried to keep me away. Instead, they included me. At first it felt strange. Birthdays, family dinners, school events. They could have seen me as a threat instead. They treated me like family. One evening I asked Michael, Why are you doing this? He answered without hesitation. Because Grace deserves every person who truly loves her. I'll never forget those words. Real parents don't compete. They cooperate. A few weeks later, the criminal trial against Rachel officially began. This wasn't about custody anymore. This was about fraud, forgery, perjury, identity theft, and falsifying legal documents. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. Rachel looked nothing like the woman I'd married. The expensive clothes were gone. The confidence had disappeared. She looked broken. The prosecutor stood before the jury. For 12 years, the defendant knowingly convinced a father his child had died. She forged legal documents. She manipulated an adoption agency. And she deprived a child of her biological father. There wasn't much for the defense to argue. The evidence was overwhelming. Then, Rachel took the witness stand. For the first time, she admitted the truth. I was scared. I thought Daniel would love the baby more than me. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I thought giving her away was the easiest solution. The prosecutor looked directly at her. So why tell him she died? Rachel lowered her head. Because I knew he'd never stop looking for her. The courtroom fell silent. After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on every major charge. The judge looked directly at Rachel. Your actions were not a single mistake. They were a series of calculated decisions that continued for over a decade. You robbed a child of knowing her father. You robbed a father of watching his daughter grow. For these crimes, I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, followed by supervised probation upon release. Rachel quietly cried as deputies placed handcuffs on her wrists. She never looked at me, not once. Life slowly became peaceful again. The newspapers moved on. The television interviews stopped. For the first time in years, our lives became normal. At least, as normal as they could be. Then one evening, Michael called. Grace wants to tell you something. I drove over immediately. She was sitting alone on the back porch, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed me one. I found out. I froze. Michael and Emily had finally told her everything. She knew who I was for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she asked, Did you really think I was dead? I nodded. Every single day. She looked down at her mug. Did you stop loving me? I felt tears fill my eyes. I loved you before I ever met you. I loved you every birthday, every Christmas, every Father's Day. I just didn't know where you were. She quietly wiped away a tear. Then she stood up, walked over, and hugged me. Not a polite hug, not an awkward hug, a real one. The kind only a daughter gives her father, she whispered. I'm sorry you missed my childhood. I held her tightly. I'm just grateful I won't miss your future. Over the following year, we slowly built the relationship we'd both been denied. I attended her soccer games, helped her study for exams, taught her how to drive. The first time she called me Dad, I had to pull my car over because I couldn't stop crying. 12 years. One word. It was worth every second. Rachel wrote Grace several letters from prison. Grace read every one of them, then quietly placed them back into their envelopes. One afternoon she asked me, should I forgive her? I thought carefully before answering. Forgiveness isn't something you owe someone. It's something you choose when you're ready. And if you're never ready, that's okay too, she nodded. I don't hate her. I just don't know her. Neither did I anymore. 3 years later, Grace graduated from high school. As she walked across the stage, she looked into the audience. There were 4 people cheering louder than anyone else. Michael, Emily, me, and my wife, Claire. Yes, life had surprised me again, 2 years after the trial. I met Claire, a pediatric nurse with the biggest heart I'd ever known. She never tried to replace anyone. She simply became another person who loved Grace. And Grace loved her back. After the graduation ceremony, a reporter approached Grace. He asked, "Who inspired you the most?" She smiled, then pointed toward all 4 of us. "I was lucky. I didn't get one family. I got 2. Then she looked at me. "My dad never stopped loving me. He was just never given the chance to find me." The reporter asked one final question. "What would you say to people who have been betrayed by someone they trusted?" Grace smiled. "The truth can be hidden, but it never disappears. And neither does real love." As we drove home that evening, I looked at the empty passenger seat where 12 years of memory should have been. For a brief moment, I felt sad. Then Grace called from the back seat. "Dad, yeah, think you can teach me how to fish this weekend?" I smiled. "I'd love to." Maybe I had missed the first 12 years, but I wasn't going to miss another day. If there's one lesson my story has taught me, it's this: lies may steal years, but they can never erase love. Justice may take time, but the truth always finds its way home. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't making the person who hurt you suffer. It's building a beautiful life they can never take away.